That was You've Got the Power from the band Art of Lovin, which features today's guest Johnny Lank, who was the bassist for the band in 1968, released one of the most praised and sought after psychedelic folk LPs of all time. The album still gets high prices for music collectors and was in 2009 released on CD in Japan on P Vine label. Thanks for being here today, Johnny. When did you first start playing guitar?
Oh, I started playing guitar probably at the age of 8, 9 years old.
So who were your early influences?
The Beatles had just come out and just playing pop music. It was after the 50s. It wasn't doo-wop. It was right in the niche when the 60s had just hit.
What was your first band?
First band was the Tempests.
Did the band play any gigs?
We played around here in the city locally, never made it into Boston. We were very young, I would say early junior high. I think our biggest gig was for the mayor's inauguration of the city of Newton. He asked us to play.
When and how did Art of Lovin form?
The Art of Lovin had been a band that was in need of a bass player. So they sort of got together, all Newtonites, and we were at the Newton Center Music store. I bumped into somebody who said, "Oh yeah, Johnny Lank plays bass. He plays guitar too. If you need one, why don't you give him a call?" And sure enough, the leader of the group, Paul Applebaum, gave me a call. We got together, we jammed a little bit, and that was it. We started to go to work immediately on his tunes.
Who were the members?
So Gail Winnick was the singer, Sandy Winslow was the drummer, Paul Applebaum wrote the songs, he was guitar, and Barry Tatelman was keyboard/sax.
What was the age range of the band members at the time?
At that time, I didn't have a license, so I was about 15 when we started to record. And the rest of the group was older than me. They were 2 or 3 years older, so they were probably 18 to 19 at the time. So during the, maybe we had a good 2-year run in there between formulating and then getting to the studio. So they were probably 18 to 20. Because I remember that I recorded it, then we came back, and then eventually got my license.
Where did the band rehearse?
Mostly in my house, as far as I can recollect.
What did the band think of the comparisons to Jefferson Airplane and the San Francisco bands?
It seemed like once we got going, anybody who did follow us or wrote about us, should I say, always referred to that. And right away we got tagged as not only being in this so-called Boston sound at the time, but being a San Francisco Gracie Slick style band, hence the Jefferson Airplane. I don't think any one of us, and I never heard Gail ever say anything negative about it, because it's kind of hard. I mean, Gracie Slick was on top, San Francisco sound was in, so if they're putting us with them, or the mamas and papas, we're happy campers. So it's very difficult not to like that.
How did the band's sound come about?
The sound was quite interesting, I think. My take on it is that Paul was a folk guitar player. So his songs were a bit, some of them or most of them, maybe a bit folkish. And he did all the writing. What he would do is write a song. He was a good singer too. Not as good as Gail, but he was a very good singer. He would write a song and then he'd bring it into band rehearsal and he'd just throw it on the table. And when he did, we all worked on it. If anybody had any ideas, we put it into it and would make it into, if it was a folky song and we didn't want the sound, then we would have to step it up and just work on it and see what worked.
Was Paul the band's only writer?
It was just Paul. He was the only one. He was doing very well. He was churning them out. And there really wasn't a need to go elsewhere at the time.
He didn't write the typical boy meets girl lyrics. Was that typical of the way that he wrote?
I don't know what was behind a lot of the lyrics to a lot of the songs. When we put together the harmony and some of the words, I must say Gail was writing some of the words also with him. But a lot of the harmonies that got put together, we were more I was more interested in the sound than the poetry of the words or the story behind them.
How long after you joined did the band get gigs?
We were writing the music, putting it together, and then I would say maybe within 6 months we started to go out and play. All local stuff, there was nothing far away, and anything from senior proms, which actually is big stuff. For a local band, the senior prom is large. So we were doing that, but at the same time, there was a guy who wanted to be part of the Bosstown Sound and somehow got a hold of us. I don't even know exactly how or through who that he got a hold of wanting to fly into Boston to hear us. He owned a record company. So at the young age that we were tickled pink for him to come over. We were not in my house, we were at somebody's house, I think it was Barry's. And he flew in. I remember driving to Logan. I remember going to Butler Aviation to pick him up. He had a private plane. And he came in with his cowboy boots on, and he listened to us for a good hour, I would say, at the house. And then he said, "You'll hear from me." And that was it. Next thing we knew, within days, there was a contract in front of us.
And that was Mainstream Records?
Yes, Mainstream Records.
This was before you did regular gigs?
We were not doing a lot of gigs, because at that moment, we did whatever came down the pike to us, but we were not actively, constantly playing. We were rehearsing, Paul was writing, we were putting it together, and then once this happened, we were focusing solely on that, because he then signed us, put us together to get us to New York. I was still in high school at the time, and so that was a weekend deal that I would fly back and forth on the weekends to record. We couldn't, for some reason he wanted to do it there, the company was there. And we went to 48th Street A&R Studios in New York City on 48th.
So all the songs were written by Paul?
Yes, for the album they were pretty much written. We may have had one, I know one song on the album was not ours, but that was it.
What can I say? He's walking away from what we've seen. What can I do? Still loving you. It's all a dream. How can we hang on to a dream?
That was Hanging On to a Dream, written by Tim Hardin from the Art of Lovin' LP. Was that a song the band picked?
No, I think Paul came up with that one.
When you were playing gigs, did you play originals, covers, or both?
We got on the track of only doing originals. Very few gigs. We were in New York, in fact, and they booked us in a gig. And I don't even remember where it was, but the reason behind that was to stay loose. So when you went into the studio, you were not stiff. You were sort of loosened up a little bit. Probably didn't get paid either, but not unusual.
What type of gigs were you doing? Any big-time shows?
No such thing as big-type shows. Big shows with the Beatles. It just didn't seem to exist, or it just had started. Let's put it that way. I shouldn't say that, because it seemed like before the late 60s, they just didn't seem to happen here like that. Maybe on the West Coast there was a couple, but there was nothing really happening here. The only thing that would happen would be the Boston Garden for the Beatles, or where I went to go see them out in Suffolk Downs. But we were just originals, did not gig much at all.
What was recording the LP like? Were the sessions really long?
They were long. They were long days and nights. We were there all, seemed like a lot of hours. It was I don't know, it was very, not shocking, but when I first walked into the studio, I couldn't go in yet. I didn't realize it, but you know, they said you have to wait. Everybody buys time in the studio. And I understood that, because we had a studio here, Ace Recording, in the alley, as everybody who was in the industry would probably have hit that studio at some time. But New York was, you know, on steroids compared to that. And, the Cowsills were finishing up an album, and a lot of big names had been in that studio, from Frank Sinatra down.
Who produced the sessions?
Bob Shadd, the owner of the company, was a hands-on guy. He was hands-on from the beginning, yet I never saw him play a musical instrument. I've never heard him sing or even hum a tune, but he was very hands-on. He had his own engineer there, but he was always there. And I'm trying to think, he started to have jazz people at the beginning of his label of Mainstream Records. I think Ella Fitzgerald he once had. I know that Big Brother and the Holding Company was there. He had just released them to Columbia, and he sold Janis Joplin off to them. So we were there. Amboy Dukes he had just started up, and they were rocking. They were just starting. Nobody knew it, but they just started to take off, and he was. I would say he was behind the engineer all the time.
How did the cover art come about?
They actually gave us a whole bunch of things to choose from, and this one was a clear winner. It fit the bill, it fit the time, everything about it was just right. I didn't know anything about it, but you just looked at all of the artwork and all of the covers that you could have had, and they could have put us on the cover. I don't know, wouldn't have cut it. I said, but the back will do. So that's how it came down.
Do you know what the symbol is on the cover?
I believe it's some sort of Buddha, but I haven't got a clue.
What did the band think of the finished LP? Was the band involved in the mixing?
Yeah, mixing was interesting. I didn't get to the mixing studios. I was failing in my grades at school, and Dad cut that one off. So they went back and did the mixing, although I'm sure that we were not instrumental in the mixing whatsoever, but I would have liked to have been there. Then we were waiting for the finished product that we could hear it, because you're in the studio, and when you're recording it in bits and pieces, you don't get to hear the whole. But the finished product came out almost 100%. I will tell you that there's a flaw or two on the album, whether anybody knows it or not, but that's just the way it goes. It's almost like building a house. I don't know if it's ever perfect.
Was it just the band doing the tracks? Was there ever much overdubbing?
There actually wasn't, if you can believe that. The studio, as I remember it, and I remember it very well, and I have pictures of it, was primitive. If you looked at it today, you would say it's quite simplistic. And even in the sound room, to play back the sound with the engineer, they had these enormous speakers hanging off the wall. I mean, monsters that were just hanging down. Even for the time, I thought it was a little overkill, but what did I know about sound? I said, they know more. Anyway, it looked like a 4-track reel-to-reel is what they put us on. And we always were together recording. And when we went in the booth to harmonize or sing, they would keep Gail, who's the lead singer, off to one side, and then we'd be in another one to do the harmony. But yes, we were always together.
The bass on the songs on the LP is absolutely amazing.
Thank you. I can't take full credit. There are 1 or 2 songs that Paul plays bass on, because there were a lot of lead riffs that he didn't want to do, or for some reason wanted me to do. So I was playing the lead, and Paul would play the bass.
You were the only players in the LP?
That's correct. There was nothing, no other person was added whatsoever. They gave us some extra instruments to use. We went to an instrument place, some emporium, where we could lease instruments, or they would lease it for us. And there may have been 1 or 2 things, nothing I remember. But no, it was just us.
What song was picked for the single?
There was a single released. You've Got the Power was the single. You've Got the Power in Good Times. And You've Got the Power was the one that we took around to the stations to get played. We had tunnel vision on that one song. It had a particular sound. It had the sound that we wanted to release. We thought for the time that it was just right for that. And the funny thing is that it ended up flipping.
Here's You Got the Power.
Watch the train as it pulls out of sight. Watch the steel, the strength and the might. She's got the power. She's got the power to pull you on in the night. Watch the train.
That was You Got the Power, the only single from the Art of Lovin' LP.
Single came out. It was You've Got the Power, which was, both of them are actually upbeat tunes. And the flip side was Good Times.
Well, you called me, and I followed. You said we'd be gone to someplace no one could see.
Well, you were right.
And made up that you good times will bring me down again. You good times will bring me down again. It was fine, 3:50 on my mind. The night it turned into day.
I was crying.
That you'd been lying.
Difficult promoting the single to radio.
When we went to bring it around to various local DJs and said, guess what? We're a local band. Here are our wares. It's not easy to get it played. It is not. We did get breaks. There's no doubt about it. I can tell you that there were certain DJs, whether they liked it or not, they knew that their audience probably didn't want to hear it. They didn't even know what it was. And we weren't going to run to FM right away. We were trying to get anywhere we could. BCN at the time was there. They wouldn't commit to playing it, but they played it. So I think we got RKO and WMEX. I don't believe BZ, and I'm trying to think who else was out there. There weren't too many left. But if we got RKO, who was 680 if I remember, and WMEX was 1060, we got them to play it. I can remember being there.
Was BCN around at the time? Did they play it?
They actually did air it, and with commentary. They were, when BCN first started, it started, I believe, at 10 o'clock at night, and I remember we used to wait till 10, turn it on, and we would listen. And maybe they had 2-hour slot, maybe they bought a 4-hour slot. My recollection was it was a Christian radio station at one time. I could be wrong, but for some reason I remember that they didn't play 24/7. They weren't even on in the day. I remember them coming on late at night. And so we would have to seek them out. We had not a clue where they were. But they ended up not only playing it, but they gave commentary to it, which I thought was very interesting and very nice of them.
Did it chart locally or nationally?
Nothing. It never hit top 40. Not that we expected it to hit top 40. It certainly could have.
What was the response to the LP?
Well, it was interesting because the album, we were a little insulated from it. Why? Because all of our friends knew it. All of our friends were very tickled pink. We were hearing a lot of feedback in our own little world. We have no idea what was going on. So finally we would call New York, ask them what's going on, how are sales, what's happening. And it ended up being that we did well on both coasts. We did okay. And then Billboard magazine gave us a review, and they would, every month they'd come out, or every 2 weeks I think it was, with the album reviews. Whatever album came out. They couldn't do everybody, but we were lucky. They got to review our album. And it was, I think it was a single page in the back. And we run out when we hear that it's going to be there, and they had a little special thing. If they really thought you had potential, you would get a red star, a red bullet as they called it, in your name, right on the album in the back in that article. And there we are next to Frank Sinatra. He got a red bullet. We get one. What are we thinking? Hey, we're on the road. We're going somewhere.
Was there only one single released from the LP?
Off that album, there was just one single released, meaning two sides. But we evidently had enough that they called us back to New York to do more recording. And what they wanted to do was put out another single, not off the album. So we went back again and did another single for them, which never got released.
Do you recall the names of the two unreleased songs?
No, but I can tell you what I do recollect, and Paul probably has the answer if somebody does. They were very good. That I remember. I liked it a lot.
Both songs are sitting in a vault somewhere.
I've called, I've really tried to reach a lot of people to see where these possible vaults could be, and nobody could even lead me anywhere. I don't know what happens to this stuff.
You never got a preview copy or acetate?
No, I never had my own, and yet I have the band on my own tape, but we never did those two songs. We seemed to practice them and then head to New York.
Did the band tour after the LP was released?
No, we waited to see what kind of responses we were going to get, and that probably would tell you where were you going to go. And sales never moved ahead from where they were. You either keep going and build up a head of steam, become something, or they're not. And that's what happened with us. They just faded away, and that's probably why the second single did not get released, is my guess.
No local shows?
Like I say, the only local shows that we were doing, if we ever got hired, were proms, something like that. Nothing too small. We didn't really get involved with real small stuff. But if it was something, reasonable size, we would do it.
When you are down, looking up from the ground, take a ride. Take a ride, take a ride, take a ride. And when your mind is thinking to climb, take a ride. Take a ride, take a ride, take a ride.
Did the band do any TV appearances?
I cannot. No television I can think of.
Were you aware of the Bosstown Sound bands, and did the band do any gigs with any of them?
We were very much aware of the other bands. I know I was. I was always in and around Boston, and I was not big on the folk scene. The folk scene was really just wrapping it up, as I would think at the time. It was there before me, before my time. And when Dylan, Baez, and all the folk people, and the Club 47s in Cambridge, as that slowly got a little quieter, and the Unicorn Coffee House was slowly just getting a little quieter, then they ended up moving. They've moved twice, I think. I remember them on Boylston Street, but they started to bring in non-folk acts. Colwell Winfield Blues Band. Then we all started playing there. When they moved to Comm Ave and they had a large spot, they took the basement, they made a little portion, Unicorn Coffee House, and then they opened up the Psychedelic Supermarket. And that's where we ended up going. George Papadopoulos was the owner, and all the bigger acts were showing up there. He had the space, and he almost was the continuation of the Tea Party. Those bands that we're talking about, whether it's Ill Wind, Eden's Children, or any of those groups that were from here, or Beacon Street Union, or Orpheus, they were all top billing bands for what we had here at the time. So they were not Boston Garden, but they were going to be the top bill. So if they're going to play at the Rat, they'll be the top band, and then they'll bring in a couple of other acts.
Were you the headliners or the opening act?
We would always share. I don't care who was on. There was always maybe an opener and a second group, but there was always two at least. Sometimes you'd see three, but what I recollect from back then were two. But they had the two sides. They had a little coffee house, so if you weren't big enough, you could play over there. And then the off nights, they could still have a little folk with no liquor license.
They'd serve soft drinks.
Soft drinks. It's a coffee house. I mean, the original one was a phone booth on Boylston Street, if you can remember that. And you walked into the phone booth, and what was there? A set of stairs. And that took you down to the basement.
Had you ever been to the Unicorn Club?
Yeah, that's in the basement of Com Ave. So in the daytime, you could play pool upstairs at Campus Q at BU and then go downstairs at night. And so that was where the Unicorn ended up. It was across from the Prue, as I said, in the telephone booth downstairs. And then they moved down the street in Boylston Street upstairs to a second or third floor, I remember, for a short while. And eventually, their last residence that I know of was 590 Com Ave. That's when he realized he had enough space to open up the psychedelic supermarket, which really, that took off. And he brought the big names into that.
You attended the Cambridge Commons concerts?
I can remember on Sundays going down to the Common. Originally, I was going to Boston Common, but eventually it seemed like the scene switched and went over to Cambridge Commons. And over in Cambridge, every Sunday, they would have bands playing outdoors on the Common. And then they were getting some names to come in there. And Buddy Miles, that you may remember, from Band of Gypsies. And a lot of guys, if they were in town, they probably stopped in there. And the crowds were huge. They were just enormous.
Did you play there?
Never, never. We weren't even together, and I think it was before the Art of Lovin was together that these shows happened. But they were a big scene at the time. I can visualize them today. Motorcycles would pull up, Hell's Angels would pull up, and yet it was quiet. Everything was quiet. It was the typical scene. No cops bothered anybody. There was probably plenty of smoking going on, and yet typical Cambridge scene. You know, everything was orderly.
I've been waiting a long time to feel this way. But when I've reached my happiness, a young face will out and say, don't your eyes hurt you from the lights? Doesn't your head hurt? Isn't it bright?
What caused the band to break up?
I think that all of us knew that we had to make a living. Eventually, reality sets in. So here we are, we have a contract, we have recording, put out an album. We probably did the best thing that we could at the time. And if it doesn't go, so be it. Nobody was bitter about it. Nobody said, well, this should have happened or that should have happened. It just slowly just faded away. And everybody went to work eventually.
What are you doing now?
I was still in high school and then eventually went to work. I was in other bands. I was in bands before it. I mean, I was always around town. So aside from just, you know, always bumping into the other guys, whether it's at Jack's drum shop and Multi, who was the drummer of the Barbarians, would always be there, or going over, and one of the unsung heroes that I always thought was a guy, Tim, who was the owner or one of the owners of EU Wurlitzer on Kingston Street, because, and in fact, a friend of mine, Harry Sandler, who's the drummer of Orpheus, worked there. He used to chase us around there, but everybody would be there. That was just a happening place. And no matter whatever your needs were, you could be a large group that you needed a guitar fixed right away because you were going on that night, or you'd be purchasing your merchandise there. But Tim would take care of you one way or another.
Did anyone join the other bands after?
I don't believe anybody did. I know later in life, maybe 40 years later, I know that Paul went into a blues band for something to do. I know that Barry, who was a keyboard player, liked to play the drums, and he would like to jam here, there, and everywhere. Gail moved out to the West Coast, and Sandy I never heard from again, unfortunately. Soon thereafter, the group disbanded for no reason that we know. Had a problem and committed suicide.
Good pictures of his art are posted on the net.
Interesting. I never saw any of that, but I did hear that he was an artist.
Good Times was placed into the Joel and Ethan Coen film, A Serious Man. Do you recall how that happened?
Not a clue. I had a friend of mine who comes into coffee every now and then early in the morning, and he said to me, I went to see a movie the other night. And he said, I'm one of those guys who sits there at the end and I watch all the run of the credits. And he said, I think I saw your group's name there. And I said, no kidding. So I came home and I researched it, and sure enough, there it was. So I called up some of the guys and I said, you're not going to believe it, but we have a credit in one of the movies. And they researched it and came back to me and said, yeah, but we didn't make the movie. It's on the cutting floor, or it's in the director's cut. So it didn't really make the movie that was shown in the movie theater. So I didn't even go see it, and it came on cable TV. So one night I see it on cable TV, so I'm watching it, and 10 minutes into the movie, I hear our song. And there it is, and it's clearly part of the movie. And I called everybody up, I said, no, we're in it. And that year it was up for an Academy Award. And here it is, 40 odd years later, or yes, every bit of it, that we are all of a sudden, should we say, recognized, but on the big screen. So it was, that was a good yuck.
The LP was released on CD on a Japanese label.
Yes, there was a lot of that. I noticed that our album, Vinyl 2, seemed to have a lot of Japanese language to it when I saw the picture, or they were selling it on eBay, and I have no idea who over there is re-releasing these CDs because we didn't have any CDs naturally, and vinyls. But I could see from the outside it wasn't exact. It looked just like it, but they added some printing on the outside, and it was Japanese, I believe.
There was a featured article on the band in Shindig magazine.
Yeah, that was something else. Shindig, as you know, actually it's a gorgeous magazine. It's high quality, when I mean gorgeous. And they did a special edition, to our surprise, they're from England, on the Bosstown Sound. The Boston Sound encompassed a bunch of our groups that we all knew and loved. And we were very fortunate that they did a nice expose on us and gave us a large picture in there and gave a little blurb on us, and all the other groups, and all the usual suspects of the 60s that were in the Bosstown Sound were in there.
Can you describe the Boston music scene at the time?
The music scene in general was happening, and for its time it definitely was happening. It was percolating. We had already gone through the British invasion, which really probably started everything. From there, we were still enjoying the British invasion. The Beatles had already come through. I mean, they were already on top, the Stones, the Dave Clark Five, and the Kinks. And then all of a sudden, the San Franciscan Sound started, and the California Sound, and everything out of the West Coast, from Moby Grape all the way to the Mamas and the Papas, and so forth. They started another sound. And now here we are in Boston trying to make music, and we're sort of torn between the two of what's really happening or not. And there's really, I mean, some of the groups are still playing some hard rock and loving it, and I was in those groups too. And then there were other guys who were trying to put out their own sound, and this Boston sound started to percolate. None of us knew it. We were all playing. We were playing together in various clubs, and there was the infamous Rat in Kenmore Square, across the street, if I remember correctly, where it's at. If I have the right name, yeah, I think it was there. I remember walking by it, and I'm trying to think where else. The Paradise wasn't open yet. There was nothing there. We had the Ark, which was around the corner, moved to a couple of places, which really was another extension of the Boston Tea Party, I think, at the time. And that moved around the corner to what today was called the Avalon, which is now House of Blues. But the Ark was there. So there were places around. If you just had a rock and roll band, you just wanted to do cover tunes, you had anything from Lucifer's to Katie's in the Basement to Bun Ratties to, don't know. But there were places at least that you could go and play and hear the groups that were happening around.
Do you recall hearing any other Boston bands on the radio?
No, not at all. I can recall listen to the radio all the time, probably like everybody did. AM was strictly top 40, forget it. You were not going to hear anything on there. If you did, it was once, that would be it, unless you made it. And I can't think of one tune that was going to be replayed other than I Can't Find the Time to Tell You by Orpheus. I just can't think of anything. I'm not saying it didn't happen. FM's a whole different game. FM, without commercials, was just getting into the game. I remember when it started, from WOR to WHDH. All of a sudden, the big guys wanted to get into it. And they were playing stuff, and then they realized, let's go out on an edge, because this is called underground radio, which it basically was. I mean, there were no automobiles with FM radio. So they didn't have the audience out there. So it was considered underground right from the beginning. And BCN stepped in with a personality to it. And they really had a personality. The other ones was pre-recorded. It was all in the can, whether you knew it or not, but you could tell that it was very sterile.
At some point, the band opened a play with Leslie West and Mountain.
If we played, let's say, the Psychedelic Supermarket, and that was a third group, and let's say Mountain hadn't made it yet, it's very possible. There were just a lot of groups, a lot of people, a lot of names, but we were in the industry, so that's what it seems like when you're there. When you're in the supermarket, there's a lot of choices. When you're sitting at home, it's a little different.
What are the members doing now?
Now, there became a lot. Paul became a great lawyer, very successful in the area. Gail, I know, had a couple of kids and moved out west. Have no idea what she was doing. Barry became very successful, went into his father's furniture business, and then took it eons. Everybody knows the Jordan's Furniture, and he's Barry of Barry and Elliott. And and Sandy unfortunately didn't make it.
Barry opened Jordan's Furniture?
I don't believe so any longer, but yes, owned it and built it up with his brothers, and now they've sold out.
Dick Summer was a big advocate of Boston bands and played them a lot on WBZ. Any recollections of him?
Okay. And Dick Summer, probably in my mind, was the first one that I heard coin this Boston sound of doing something with it. He was not just playing it, but he was talking about it. He was doing something about it. It wasn't enough in the end, I don't think. And I think the biggest problem that we had in the end, as I look backwards with the Boston Sound, is that there were no festival of any sort that, had there be one festival, put the groups together, call it the Boston Sound, I think it would have been a success overnight.
A lot of folks would have gone to a show like that at the Hat Show.
Right. I think anything had to be good size, had to be of scale, and that would have got notoriety. Remember, we didn't have any other way of hearing things other than picking up that week's Billboard. I think it was bi-weekly. So Billboard could tell us. Rolling Stone wasn't out, I don't believe. In the middle to late 60s, I just don't remember seeing it. If you wanted to know what was going on, a friend of mine started a magazine, Boston After Dark, which did very well, which turned into the Phoenix. And so those were the places. And then just pinning them up. I mean, if you walked into any music shop, you'd know what's going on in the next week or two right away. Everybody knew what was going on. Like I explained, the catalyst would have really been some sort of a, unfortunately, a festival. But in the Northeast, you're not going to really get that. We don't have the weather. We don't have the time. There were none. I can't think of anything. And if you have something like Woodstock that appears out of nowhere in 1969, that now dragged me away. So now I'm going to New York. I'm going to the festival, and who am I going to hear? All the big guys and the enemy, the California Sound. So we just got, that was, in my eyes, the end.
What are you doing now?
Right after the band dismantled, went into the family business, and I did continue to get into groups, just local stuff, just something to do 1 or 2 nights a week, maybe. Playing cover stuff, but I like playing music, so, but I never, went into it any as serious as the Art of Lovin did and tried to write anything.
Thanks for being on the Boston Beat today, Johnny.